latent knowledge that is there existing through making sure that we have access to educational opportunities. And that is an important note for us in our development trajectory. So I say again, Mr. President, that having access and affordability to educational opportunities is something that is extremely important. Mr. President, there have been myriad of studies. I can look at UNESCO did a study in 2017, the OECD 2018. If you go on to ResearchGate, which is a research portal, you will find a number of theories and analyses that have been done on the correlation between educational opportunity, attainment, and poverty. All of them suggesting that in varying circumstances, that there is indeed a positive correlation between educational attainment, educational access, increasing educational opportunities, and reducing poverty. So that there is an acceptance, again, and particularly for developing countries, that education is a critical driver for development, Mr. President. But I find, Mr. President, that when we talk about education here nationally, we immediately narrow our focus to primary and secondary. We immediately begin to talk about the 11 plus, as if the entire education system is defined within the narrow context of what happens at the primary and also at the secondary level. And Mr. President, it is fundamental. The primary and secondary education, that journey is a critical building block. It is a determinant, in many instances, of how well students will then be able to engage in higher education, tertiary education. But Mr. President, we have to then ask ourselves, if in narrowing the discussion, if in narrowing the debate, only about that mechanism that moves children from primary to secondary, if we aren't doing ourselves a disservice, because the educational system is also much more about that. When the government announced that journey of education transformation, it was taken on board that the system also has to be able to look at fundamentally at issues of quality, of the curriculum, teachers' development. What happens to how we include, whether it is the disabled, those that come from lower income households, the issues of fairness, the issues of equity, as being important, and that the discussion about the mechanism is important, but that it is one facet of that. But another important part of the discussion that we always leave, Mr. President, is what happens next. What happens next to children, even within the context of a flawed system, who are interested in moving on to higher education? What is the analysis that we undertake about whether or not those systems are allowing for that smooth transition, about whether that movement from secondary into higher education is affordable? What happens, Mr. President, about who gets those opportunities and who doesn't? If we stop only at one point within the entire system, then we will miss, Mr. President, fundamentally, a critical element that also has links, again, to development. Because it isn't just only education, but again, the analysis suggests that higher education is extremely important. In fact, Mr. President, UNESCO did some analysis in November 2024, and in that analysis, it looked at 146 countries and looked at their development trajectories and noted that for all of those countries, that they each had a national plan for higher education. And out of those 146 countries, 81% in those national plans on higher education had a plan for increasing access. Had a plan for increasing access. So again, globally, the understanding that higher education is critical and fundamental to development, to social equality, to ensuring competitiveness as a driver. We are seeing, Mr. President, other countries have that recognition. Mr. President, when Sir Hilary Beckles, and at that time he was Vice Chancellor at the University of the West Indies, he had announced a policy, or rather a goal, let me say a policy, a goal, of a graduate in every household, a graduate in every household. And I think that we heard that, and again, we reduce it to making sure that we can increase the number of university students. But I went back to Sir Hilary's speech. What Sir Hilary was doing in his speech and even in announcing that goal wasn't just talking about increasing a number, he was making a fundamental development connection. If you read his speech, Hilary prefaced, Sir Hilary, let me friends, but Sir Hilary, my apologies, prefaced his indication of that goal of a university graduate in every household by noting that there was a level of poverty that existed within the Caribbean that he said to us that we should not be comfortable with. That he said to us that we needed to be able to contend with. And in order to be able to contend with that, we have to be able to look at how every child is able to contribute to that. And that because we needed to be able to contend with that level of poverty, the dream, therefore, was to have a university graduate in every household. So that the goal was not about the number. The goal was about appreciating, again, that correlation, particularly for us in Barbados, particularly for the region, that had to do with breaking generational poverty, that had to do with making sure that we could secure an economic development that would be sustainable, had to do with making sure that we had within our households a university graduate. Not the number, but it was a philosophical way of looking at how our society needed to develop by having that university graduate. And Sir Hilary also noted as well that his frame was not necessarily new. And he echoed the words of, God rest his soul, the late Rex Nettleford, who was the Vice Chancellor Emeritus, who said to us that university education was perhaps one of the greatest gifts that the Caribbean had given itself. That university education, higher education, was one of the greatest gifts that the Caribbean had given itself. And I don't know, Mr. President, again, that we have fully understood that. We speak about education and its importance, and we speak about it only, perhaps most of the time, let me say, in terms of getting a job, right? People come out of school to get a job. We come out of university to get a job. What those esteemed gentlemen were saying to us was that it is more than that. That higher education was fundamental to the nation primarily. And the access to it, again, was important to our development. But at the same time, there is a connection that I feel that all Barbadians know when it comes to education, when it comes to understanding that link between education and how we break generational poverty, the importance to households, the importance to future. And so, Mr. President, it was the breaking of that resonance and connection in 2013 with the Democratic Labour Party. The creation of that breach, and perhaps I would even go so far, Mr. President, and say betrayal with the Democratic Labour Party. It was not just about the action in the moment. Hard choices had to be made. Any government is faced with hard choices, particularly when you are facing an economic downturn. And the Democratic Labour Party made a choice so that free tertiary education got whittled down to an economic black liner on it that says this is what we can give up. This is what we can take away from people. And it was not just, Mr. President, again, the disdain for the legacy of Earl Walton Barrow, but it was a fundamental misunderstanding, again, as I said before, of what drives development. And perhaps some would say, well, okay, it's education, so we didn't do anything, we still supported primary and secondary, so we could move the tertiary education. Let Bajans pay for it. This is what, you know, in the midst of everything. But in doing so, it was a demonstration, again, of, like I said, Mr. President, of that misunderstanding of what drives development, particularly for small states. It was a misunderstanding of how Barbadians viewed that pride of having that university graduate within the household. It was a misunderstanding of how generational poverty was linked to that access to higher education. It was a misunderstanding of the capacity of Barbadians to bear the burden. I was speaking actually, Mr. President, to a parent in Bourne's Land just yesterday, and she was telling me about her struggles as a single parent, but not only about her struggles, but her aspirations. And one of the things that she said to me was that her daughter was able to go to university. She worked through there for her daughter to be able to get university access. She was able to pass with a first-class honors. And now her daughter was making more money than her. And when she said it with a smile and with such pride, so that the same woman who before was saying to me, these are all the things they're facing, and the struggle is so hard. From the time she began to speak about her daughter and what her daughter achieved, the posture changed, Mr. President. The posture completely changed to now one of hope, to now one of the possibility of one of the things that she said, well, I know my daughter can come and help me. My daughter can help me, and we can be able to do better. And that was the connection, that is the connection that we have as Barbadians to higher education, to university education. And again, Mr. President, as I said, access and affordability matters, Mr. President. And the Student Revolving Loan Fund is one of those important mechanisms that have been put in place to enhance that access, especially for higher education, and especially for Barbadians who might not have that cash at hand, but might need that bridging, Mr. President, to assist them and their children to be able to have access, so that they can be assured that higher education, again, is not just for the elite. That yes, well, they would have been able to manage and pay the bus fare as they go through the primary and the secondary education, but that even as they attempt to move on, the Student Revolving Loan Fund stands there to be able to say, we will still have your back, because we will still allow you to be able to afford to move your children onto higher education and to allow them as well to be able to achieve in the same way that others can. The Student Revolving Loan Fund, the Act was established 1976. I already spoke, Mr. President, to the fact that it's referenced CAP 54, CAP 54A. It was established, Mr. President, primarily to ensure, as I said, that we have loans, and loans, Mr. President, particularly in areas which were perceived to be of national priority. It replaced the Higher Education Loan Fund, which was then administered by the tertiary section of the Ministry of Education, Youth Affairs and Culture. During the 48 years of the existence of the Student Revolving Loan Fund, it has granted some 15,000 loans, Mr. President, 15,000 loans, and, Mr. President, equating to a dollar value of 400 million Barbados dollars, which is a significant investment. So again, so that when we talk even about investment in education, again, we don't often see that investment. We see investment in education, again, as I said, only what is happening there at the level of primary and secondary. But that $400 million represents a significant investment in people who would otherwise perhaps not be able to afford to have their children, Mr. President, not only to be able to access education, university education here, but also overseas. There was a young lady I remember from Harmony Hall area, and she'd gotten a scholarship, not scholarship, she got accepted into university in China. And to do this particular area of study, which was not being offered here in Barbados. I remember when her parents contacted me, and young lady so excited, but then the mother called me one side, and she said, I don't want to burst her bubble, but I don't know how we can pay for it to get there. And I had to tell her, but no, you have a facility. Check the Student Revolving Loan Fund. You got to get some sureties, but they might be able to help you depending on how much it is that you need, and then she can go, she can see if she gets some scholarships and so on. So it provides that important function, Mr. President, again, that allows people who believe or who feel or don't have the capacity to be able then to fund their children's higher education needs. So that over time, we have seen the Student Revolving Loan Fund, and it has gone through, Mr. President, I will tell you honestly, some ebbs and flows just in terms of its function. We would have seen over time that its debt ratio was extremely high. During the early years, you had a debt ratio of something like 90%. Then I think around the 2000s, it lowered again, came down a little bit to like about 64%, Mr. President. But I am pleased today to say that at March 30th, 2025, that debt profile is now down, Mr. President, to 11%. And the aim now, Mr. President, is to make sure that it moves to 5% and lower. And that is part of, as you will see, the changes that are intended within this bill to enable a more structure to be brought to the Student Revolving Loan Fund to enhance its functionalities and its delivery as well. One of the reasons why the Student Revolving Loan Fund has been attractive for many Barbadians is that, Mr. President, it offers a preferred interest rate. The interest rate is often, Mr. President, below market rate. No repayment is required during the agreed study period. There is an extended repayment period as well as a moratorium of interest during the study period. In addition, at the conclusion of the agreed study period, students are afforded an additional period known as a grace period where repayment is still not mandatory, although, Mr. President, interest accrues during this period. This extra time is designed to allow students to find employment without immediately having to worry about the repayment of the loan, Mr. President. They have a grace period. They can go and study, Mr. President, not have to worry immediately in the midst of trying to make sure they pass exams, buy books, all of those other things that they need to be able to do. But their parents as well can be comforted that the resources are there and available to allow them to be able to succeed in their endeavor. And then even after, to allow them time again to breathe, Mr. President, then to find some work, and then to be able to repay that loan. And that is fundamental, Mr. President, again, for that group of people. And I say that group of people because that includes me, because my daughter as well had a student revolving loan fund loan to be able to fund her education. Yeah? So that is an important mechanism for many of us. Over the life of the Student Revolving Loan Fund, there have been many amendments that have been made, again, to just ensure that the Student Revolving Loan Fund remains relevant, remains fit for purpose, and there have been a number of innovations, again, to open up the Student Revolving Loan Fund to again, broaden the base of people who can participate. For instance, Mr. President, the fund initially only catered to full-time students. So if you're a part-time student, or if you were studying online, you could not get a student revolving loan fund initially. And again, that is the traditional way of looking at education, the traditional way of understanding how education was to be delivered. So it meant, Mr. President, if I was at university or anywhere, because I went part-time, because I could not afford, Mr. President, to start working and going to university. I had to be able to pay for the bus fare, the whatever else, and help my parents and whatever I could not afford. But then I would not have been able to have access to the Student Revolving Loan Fund if I was a part-time student. And so you would see that that is one of the innovations over time that has changed. So now part-time students can have access to the Student Revolving Loan Fund. It also broadened the areas that were determined as national priority. And I'm happy to say, Mr. President, that if you are in the cultural arena, involved in the orange economy, that yes, your area of study, Mr. President, including dance, Mr. President, you can go to the Student Revolving Loan Fund and be able to get a loan. And again, that is innovation, because you can imagine that that traditional notion of what is priority and what that looks like for us in the traditional areas, whether it's accounts, whether it's a doctor, whether it's a lawyer, etc., that the Student Revolving Loan Fund has been able to bridge that and be able to say, well, no, we understand where the economy is going, we understand where the growth trajectory is going, and therefore we are widening that in order to embrace as much as possible. We'd have also seen as well, Mr. President, a movement in the loan limit from 20,000, imagine just 20,000. Most of us now would laugh at that because we're not so sure what that will be able to fund in these days. I don't know if that was be able to even fund some books for the university. Mr. President, I remember I went to university, and again, I could not afford to buy any books. I bought one sociology book. There was a famous sociology book, Harlambos. Yes, Harlambos. You had to use Harlambos for your entire university education. That's the only book, Mr. President, I was able to buy. And so all of my other papers, everything like that had to be photocopied, or I had to borrow somebody's library book. Or I had to borrow some library book. But my one Harlambos is the book that I saved up and make sure that I had at home. Even now that my daughter is doing university, even just accessing papers online, because you would think that because things are online, that they mean that they're either free or accessible. But what my universities are actually making you pay. And they have it locked so that you can't share from year to year. So that even though we all doing the same course, every student then still has to purchase their own every single time. So that there is an expense that is growing. So you would have seen the Student Revolving Loan Fund move from that loan limit of 20,000 to 125,000, again, allowing, Mr. President, for scale. So it means now that students who want to have the opportunity to take more advanced courses, more advanced education in other places now, will then be able to do so and not be limited, Mr. President, in the same way. You will see as well, Mr. President, the Student Revolving Loan Fund has imbued deeper changes as well. If you go on the site right now, so this is not privileged information, but if you go on the site right now, you will see the Student Revolving Loan Fund is offering back-to-school loans at easy rates as well. Bread and butter issue that the Student Revolving Loan Fund is, again, responding to the dynamics of the society, to the recognition, again, that there are those that are still vulnerable and that will need the assistance in order to make sure that they can have their children at school and functioning, again, without all the time having to be worrying consistently every day about where will I get the resources. And Mr. President, I can tell the truth. I don't have, my daughter is, my daughter's at university now, but primary and secondary education, I know I don't look like it, Mr. President, but don't worry about that. Primary and secondary education now is so expensive. The books you have to be able to purchase, well, depending on what type of parents you are, the bag you have to be able to purchase, the shoes. When I heard the cost of the shoes now, Mr. President, it's not like in my daughter's days, if my daughter was to tell stories, she would tell you that I used to make sure she washed the bag, and if it ain't look too thin, we cutting off the little strings and stuff wrong it, and we can make it look nice, and she wearing it back the next time. I was a bad mother, and I have no apologies for it. I have no apologies for it. So it was either you choose, you get a new pair of shoes, or you get a new bag. You get a new pair of shoes, or you get a bag. When she get a little older or so, fine. But when she a little, that don't make a difference between when you go in and learn thing. Shoes, nice and polished, nice socks. You get your uniform, ribbons in your hair, and the bag and the shoes we could work through. But that still creates an expense, Mr. President, and the purchase of the books and whatever. So the Student Revolving Loan Fund now then provides that, again, to be able to help students as well. But they've even gone in even further. So now, again, realizing that we have an aging population, they're introducing professional and training loans as well. Again, Mr. President, that commitment to ongoing higher education we see coming through from how the Student Revolving Loan is functioning. But even with those changes and others, we recognize that there were some challenges, and you will see that reflected in the proposed and what we have before us in the bill. Number one, Mr. President, the pool of sureties in Barbados, again, small place, shrinking. I don't know, Mr. President, any one of you, but you would get almost in a year 3 or 4 persons coming to you asking you to be surety. It could only be surety for one person at a time. And then some people don't want to be a surety because you never know when you might have to go for your own. So that the pool of sureties shrinking, and then that then became a barrier for people being able to access because they were saying, I cannot get a surety. I cannot get a surety in order then to be able to go forward to the Student Revolving Loan Fund. And Mr. President, you would see, again, that one of the changes that this bill and therefore its regulations is attempting to do is to say that at a particular threshold, you only now need not 2 sureties, but 1. And as well, you can mix surety and security. So that if you are not able to meet the higher threshold, by being able to secure that second surety, you can match it now by having security with it. Again, opening up and broadening that access. And also as well, Mr. President, before, again with my daughter signed, the agreement was between her and the Student Revolving Loan Fund because you have to be 18. What these changes are here that are presented in this bill is suggesting as well, know that parents or those that are guardians can now go forward for a loan as well, Mr. President. So rather than that child, now again, we're broadening access, we're broadening who can be able to go before the Student Revolving Loan Fund as well. And Mr. President, I'll come to some of the specific areas here that we will see in the legislation that have been updated, like I said, to enhance the functioning and to enhance the access, broadening of the access. So first of all, you would see that at section 4.1, we have a change from the management committee to a board of directors. So again, if you look at the previous act, you would see continuously that the affairs of the Student Revolving Loan Fund were governed by this management committee. And in order to strengthen its effectiveness, it is proposed here in this bill that we move to a facilitation of a board of directors in order to be able to govern the affairs. It also, as well, at section 5.1e, makes provision for compliance with the Public Finance Management Act 2019 as well. At section 5.1gh, it allows for the Student Revolving Loan Fund to now take deposits, because before it was not allowed to take deposits, Mr. President. So now, in this bill, it makes provision at that, as I said, 5.1gh for the Student Revolving Loan Fund to take deposits and also as well pay interest on those deposits. It addresses, Mr. President, at section 6, conflict of interest of board of directors, which is important. At section 7, it provides for an exemption of the Student Revolving Loan Fund from any licensing requirements. At section 9, it allows the Student Revolving Loan Fund, as I would have explained just now, to lend directly to parents or guardians of a person who is enrolled in educational institutions. Before that was not allowed. The loan was between the Student Revolving Loan Fund and the student. But now this change says now that guardians and parents, etc., that loan that can be lent directly to them as well. Importantly, Mr. President, at section 9.2, applicants over 50 years would now have to apply to the Minister for approval to apply for a loan instead of the current 35 years, which is important. So we're going to see that part that says that if you're 50, that you have to apply to the Minister. But before, the age limit was what? 35 years old. 35 years old. So we've moved from 35 to 50. We've moved from 35 to 50, but then say if you're beyond 50, then you would apply directly to the Minister. So a quantum leap just in terms of that age threshold, which is important as well, recognizing the demographic changes, Mr. President, that are happening within our society. It changes at section 13, we change the current provision which links the interest rate charged on loans by the Student Revolving Loan Fund to the minimum savings rate and allows the Student Revolving Loan Fund Board in consultation with the Minister of Education to determine the interest rates applicable to loans. And that is a positive thing because it provides for some flexibility in terms of determining the interest rates so that then the Student Revolving Loan Fund can, again, if deems necessary, based on what is happening within the market, can have an interest rate that is lower than the prevailing market rate, again, making sure that there is access for people who need it to the Student Revolving Loan Fund. It provides, Mr. President, at section 22, to extend the period to serve on paid debt certificates from the current 14 to 13 days. So what happened, Mr. President, if the serving of that debt notice went beyond 14 days, and that can happen because you would serve a notice, the person that lived there, they may get it, all sorts of things. They would have to continually start the process over. The movement from that 14 to 13 days allows, Mr. President, greater time for them to be able to address those outstanding loan payments and then also as well ensure further stability. It expands, Mr. President, the board from 7 to 8 and also allows, and this is in the first schedule, the minister to appoint the chairman and deputy chairman. Now, why would that be, Mr. President? Essentially, under the previous act, the permanent secretary, Mr. President, and the chief education officers automatically sat on the management committee. And here now we have a board of directors, but we're saying, listen, the permanent secretary and the chief education officer may not necessarily have all the key skills for the functioning of the Student Revolving Loan Fund, and therefore it is important that we bring in new skills in order to ensure that it is fit for purpose. And therefore this provision is important to allow us to be able to make sure that we have a Student Revolving Loan Fund that is functioning as well. Importantly, Mr. President, as well, there are a couple of other things as well. So one of the areas also was the age for sureties, And what this does is also make sure that we increase the minimum age for the sureties from 54 to 60. So they not only had an age lending threshold of 35, but also in terms of the surety as well. So now you have that you can be a surety up to 60 years, but within particular thresholds, again, of borrowing. Because there are sometimes, Mr. President, you may not necessarily want to borrow the 125,000 or even the 50,000. You're trying to bridge a gap in educational expenses that may be a little 10,000, a little 15, or even 5, probably just to buy books, just to take care of particular expenses. And then you would have then been limited the age of the sureties for that short duration of time. So this then again provides for more fulsome access and broadening the base as well. It also as well, very importantly, allows people who are not currently within the educational system, but want to be able to do so, because before, Mr. President, in order to be able to access the loan, you would have had to be accepted into a university. You were going into university, you had plans to be able to do so. But there are cases where people are employed in the educational institution themselves and then wanted as well for future growth in order to have access to the loan. And so that these changes will provide for that as well. Mr. President, what we are seeing in these changes is the attempt to make a fit-for-purpose loan fund, a fit-for-purpose facility that will grow, that will be sustainable as well, that will ensure that the broad mass of Barbadians, once they are interested, can be able to access that educational opportunity through the provision of funding that actually meets their needs, Mr. President, that is affordable. And I want to say as well that having interacted with the officials from the Student Revolving Loan Fund, it is not only the mechanism, but the facilitation as well that happens. The Student Revolving Loan Fund is not set up to deny people, but to facilitate the application, facilitate the access. You can call officers, you can set up an appointment, find out information. Mr. President, they will be able to work with you, work you through the process. And again, not just the mechanism, but the process that is facilitatory. Mr. President, as I close where I started, access and affordability matters. It is why there is an SDG 4. And the SDG 4 not only speaks to quality education, but if you look at the targets and the indicators as well, if you look at target 4.3, that speaks fundamentally to access to higher education and its importance. And that imbuing of that SDG within the SDG framework on education and the access to higher education grounds, again, the importance of that link to how we develop, first, globally, the global population, but important for us as a people. And the importance of recognizing that the educational system travels. It is a journey, Mr. President, that should be ongoing, and that access to vocational training and higher education is critical to how our people will develop. It is critical to the sense of pride that we are called on to imbue, and the extent to which, as a country, that we can harness all of the available skills and build the knowledge economy that will allow us to be competitive socially and economically. Mr. President, I am obliged, and I beg that this bill be read a second time.
Thank you very much, Senator Dr. Chantal Maroney. Senator Laurel.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I will not delay the House too long in terms of my contribution to this legislation, to this bill, the Student Revolving Loan Fund. I do think that the Minister did a good job in terms of explaining the changes that has happened with the Student Revolving Loan Fund over the years, possibly a little bit more in terms of the necessity to move from the committee to the board, in terms of explanation. But in terms of the importance of the Student Revolving Loan Fund, we all recognize